man there. Good morning, everybody. Fox News alert now. This key city in Iraq falling to ISIS terrorists. Could this now lead to a change in U.S. strategy? As the White House continues to publicly downplay the loss, of Ramadi, privately, President Obama is said to be considering a change. But what could that change be? Good morning, everybody. I'm Bill Hemmer, live back here in America's Newsroom with my partner here.
Hello there. Welcome back. Good to see you this morning, Bill. Good morning, everybody. I'm Martha McCallum. So the administration insisting publicly that the ISIS victory in Ramadi, not a game changer, they say. White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest refusing to even admit that it's a major problem.
Would you say that overall this strategy has been a success?
Well, John, yeah, I mean, overall, yes. That doesn't mean that there haven't been areas of setback, as we saw in Ramadi.
Team Fox coverage on this. Doug McKelway live at the White House, and then we're going to get reaction from Congressman Adam Kinzinger. But first, we start with Doug. So, Doug, tell us about this potential new strategy that the White House is now said to be considering on this.
Well, Martha, at the very least, the White House appears to be taking much more seriously this latest ISIS threat, the capture of Ramadi, the capital of the Anbar province, only 70 miles west of Baghdad, more seriously than White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest led on yesterday when he fielded some questions from reporters about the capture of Ramadi. Here he was.
Are we going to light our hair on fire every time that there is a setback in the campaign against ISIL, or are we going to take very seriously our responsibility to evaluate those areas where we succeed and evaluate where steps are necessary for us to change our strategy where we've sustained setbacks?
Oh, to many administration critics, Earnest's comments spoke volumes about the administration's failure to take the seriousness of the ISIS threat in its entirety. Listen to Speaker Boehner.
When a major city in Iraq, Ramadi, gets overrun by ISIL, and the administration says, well, it's just a temporary setback. It's 70 miles from Baghdad. It's time for the president to get serious about this threat to Americans and our allies all around the world.
But now we know that the president yesterday huddled with his national security team over the Iraq crisis. The White House says that President Obama reaffirmed support for Prime Minister al-Abadi's efforts and welcomed efforts by the Iraqi government to accelerate the training of local tribes and to retake Ramadi with both Shia and Sunni tribesmen. Also, as Ramadi was falling last week, the U.S. committed to provide Baghdad forces with 1,000 shoulder-fired missiles. This is a weapon that Iraqi forces say they desperately need to combat one of the greatest threats posed by ISIS now, which is mass attacks by VBEDs, vehicle-borne improvised explosive devices, basically suicide cars all approaching cities in one fell swoop. It's a frightening, frightening thing. They say they need those shoulder-fired missiles. They're scheduled to arrive sometime in June, Martha. Well,
maybe they're coming in June, but, you know, the critics of this plan say that could be too little too late, Doug.
And that's largely a reflection of the fact that retaking cities is much, much more difficult than retaking the countryside. You cannot do it with air power alone, and you cannot do it with troops who are unwilling to fight. Here's Congressman Duncan Hunter.
It's too late for these cities. We're not going to have Americans going into these cities again to free them, and I don't think that the Iraqi militias can do it. I mean, this is going to be hard house-to-house fighting with suicide bombers. This is going to be a tough nut to crack.
So what happened?
One thing is for certain, the administration is not considering sending more U.S. ground troops into Iraq, but that's what some critics say is precisely needed to defeat this ISIS threat. Martha?
Doug, thank you.
So we heard the White House calling this a success. Congressman Adam Kinzinger, a pilot in the Air National Guard, served 2 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. In fact, he was just in Iraq about 6 months ago. Sir, good morning to you from Capitol Hill.
Hey, good morning. Thanks.
If they call it a success, what would you call it?
I'm going to call it at best a stalemate in Iraq. But keep in mind, not just the Battle of Iraq. Iraq is part of this whole fight against ISIL or ISIS. You have ISIS and these militias moving into, you got fights in Lebanon, obviously Syria. We're talking about it in Libya. Tunisia, we're beginning to see that. I mean, it's all over the world that you're seeing ISIS or groups that start to align themselves with it. So, yeah, if we want to look just at Iraq, I would call it at best a stalemate, but we're probably losing a lot of ground. Obviously, obviously the fall of Ramadi means a big deal, even though the administration is trying to downplay it. I commend them on resetting the strategy. But I think instead of saying, here's the red line, we're not going to put any more troops in, they need to say, here's the red line, we're going to destroy ISIS, and we're going to use the proportional violence of the military to the point where we can destroy this threat.
11 months ago, the president said this on screen for our viewers, quote, "The analogy we use around here sometimes, and I think is accurate, is if a JV team puts on Lakers uniforms, that doesn't make them Kobe Bryant." What do you think of that statement now?
Well, it's when the president said it, I mean, that was such a flip statement, right? It was like kind of a dismissive thing. Now we see that that's not just a flip statement, it's dangerous at best, you know, to say that this is just a JV team. Because now what we're seeing is not only is ISIS growing in that threat, you're seeing Boko Haram, you're seeing Al-Shabaab, you're seeing Al-Qaeda in Yemen, all gaining in strength, the Taliban, frankly, and they're all in essence joining forces under this jihadist umbrella. So if this is a JV team, this is a JV team that can beat the Chicago Bulls in their best years.
Well, you call the administration tone deaf, and perhaps that's changing now. What do you want them to hear in terms of changing this strategy to make it effective? If you believe the current fight against ISIS is in Anbar province, specific to Iraq as of today.
Look, the president's got to stand up and say, you know, I'm going to quit putting red lines down about no American boots on the ground, no this, no that, not Iraq 3. And what he needs to say is, we're going to have to destroy this. Because, look, if it's not President Obama that destroys this threat, it's going to be the next president of the United States, and it's going to be much harder to do it because they continue to gain territory and gain strength. So he needs to say, look, we're going to use the military power necessary to defeat them. That's going to mean embedding, frankly, direct action folks like what we saw happen in Syria. It's going to take forward air controllers with the Iraqi military. It's going to take empowering the Sunni tribes that feel disempowered. That's how we were so successful in the surge in Anbar province in the first place. So
you know
it's going to take a real step up.
But what the White House would argue is that the strategy is working because they went into Kobani and beat ISIS there. They went in the Mosul Dam and knocked them back there. They went into Crete 3 weeks ago and knocked them back there as well. Is that point well taken or not?
Well, look, there's always places. I don't want to ever downplay a victory of the United States or the West. There are places where we've seen success, you know, Kobani and places like that. But losing Ramadi is a huge deal. I mean, that controls the supply route between Jordan and Syria and the ISIS forces that are surrounding Baghdad and everywhere else. That's much bigger than they say it to be. I get why they downplay it because it makes us look really bad. But at the end of the day, they're going to have to step up and say, yes, we've had some mild success in these areas. We need success in these other areas. And also, by the way, the ISIS threat is not just in Iraq. It's in Syria, it's in Libya, and it's in a lot of other places.
Well, Libya is going to be another flashpoint, as you well know, based on the reporting we're getting this week. Sir, thank you for your time. Adam Kinzinger, Republican from Illinois, from Washington. Martha.
Well, this news of the fall of Ramadi is sickening. One Gold Star mother, Debbie Lee's son, Mark Lee, was the first Navy SEAL to be killed in the Iraq War. She says that city's loss is much more than a setback, as John Kerry called it. She wants to know that her son's death was not in vain, and that we will keep those symbolic cities that we sacrifice so much for free for the Iraqi people, as her son and his colleagues intended it to be. We are going to speak with Debbie Lee once again here in America's Newsroom coming up later this hour.
The ultimate sacrifice. At the end of that conversation on Libya, keep your eye on this. Reports of ISIS sending money and men already into that country with no working government to speak of now.
I mean, the acceptance is perhaps necessary from the White House that this is a very large-scale confrontation now in northern Africa, in the Middle East, and that it is spreading to a lot of areas and needs to be dealt with perhaps on a much more large-scale, comprehensive method. So we're going piece by piece here in Iraq right now. We're going to talk about that coming up in just a moment.